How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. I was taking some time off for the past 2 weeks, but now I'm back and I have some new model kits. I also have a fun idea for how to use them. I've been interested in buying a real grade kit for a while, and I had to go with the Astray Red Frame because he has a katana called the Gerbera Straight, which is pretty sweet. Real grade kits use the same skeletal understructure as master grade kits, but they are the same 1 to 1/44 scale as high grade kits. So it's a nice combination of detail and convenient smaller size, which is perfect for dioramas. I was removing pieces from their runners and everything was going great, until it wasn't. I was removing the face of the Gundam, which happens to be quite an important piece, and it shot across the room, and apparently into the void, because I searched and I could not find it, so I believe it no longer exists. Which is alright, I will fix that bridge before I cross it later. Putting this real grade kit together was a blast. The mechanics and engineering of these kits that Bandai does are wild. Genuinely so much fun to assemble, and I'd highly recommend if you've never done it. It finally got time to assemble the head, but as you saw earlier, the face vanished without a trace. Luckily, a sharp hobby blade and some white styrene was all I needed to create a replacement part. I measured out the empty space on the face, and then I used the box art to recreate the design. It's not absolutely perfect if you look too close, but I'm pretty happy with it. After the head was done, I stuck it to the body, and then I constructed all of the accessories and weapons, including the Gerbera Straight. The blade comes with a nice metallic coating that shimmers in the light, and if this thing was 1 to 1 scale, it would be over 50 feet long. And boy oh boy, is it sharp. Off camera, I slapped on almost all of the 65 stickers that came with the kit, and it really does make this thing pop. And with that, the red frame was done, and it was time to move on to his opponent. For the scene that I was inspired by and am recreating, I couldn't find exactly the right kits, so I decided not to worry too much about the accuracy and just aim to capture the cool factor. As I was reading these instructions, I decided there was too much construction footage in this video, so to keep things from feeling repetitive, I built this guy using stop motion. The Duel Gundam comes with an assault shroud, which is like extra padding, more bulk, and it also comes with a shoulder cannon, which is pretty cool. After the stickers were on, the kit was done, and it was time to assemble our last model kit for the day, which is from a different Gundam universe entirely, but it was the only Gundam flight system that I could find. And instead of stop motion, I switched back to standard assembly footage for this one, because it didn't have arms and legs. I glued all of the middle pieces together on this kit because they're going to go through a little bit of stress later, and I didn't want them to fall apart. When the aircraft was done, I test fit the rider, and unfortunately the extra muscles made him not flexible enough to be posed how I wanted him to, so those had to go. Without the shoulder pads, he can strike a much better pose. With that, all the kits were done, and as you can see, we have a spectrum of realism from super detailed all the way to it looks like a cartoon. So the next step was to add some touch-ups and get these things battle-worn and battle-ready. I started with an enamel pin wash to get some contrast in all the details and recesses, and I dabbed the excess up with a paper towel. I probably should have given the model kits a protective clear coat before the wash, which did fine on the red frame, but a few minutes after I applied it to the Duel Gundam, a few of the pieces cracked. That was a rookie mistake on my part. Luckily, nothing too serious cracked and everything got glued back together just fine. For the third kit, I decided a pin wash was not going to cut it, so I broke out my airbrush and did some post shading with a black primer. I used the original colors as the base colors for the paint job, no need to reinvent the color wheel, and after the panels were darkened with a bit of exaggeration, I gave the ship 3 different colored glazes to reach the color variation that was shown on the box art. Once dry, the final step was to use a metallic silver paint on the edge of a hobby tool on all the edges and corners of the ship to create a nice chipped paint over metal look. That did not take very much time at all, and I'm really happy with the results. I repeated the same edge chipping process on the mobile suits as well. With that, the painting was done, and I'm really happy with the upgrades to all of these, but especially with the flight system. At this point, we have some cool action figures, But the next step is to find a good way to display them. In the scene I'm recreating, a Shigu comes swooping across, chasing the red frame, who turns around and slices his flight system in two straight down the middle, which is exactly what I'm about to do on camera on my bandsaw. I adjusted the height of the blade to fit the ship just right, and then I sliced it in two, a little more slowly and carefully than the Gerbera Straight would. After that, I put my bandsaw back off camera, and it was time to paint the inside of the ship. In spite of the glue, a few of the pieces did indeed crack, so I glued those back together again and primed the inside of the ship black. I then switched to white and painted all of the lines, and the overspray was intentional. The goal was to add a little bit more of a glowing effect from all the freshly cut lines. Over top of the white, I switched to orange and I covered all of that, and then I switched back to white and painted over the orange on just the lines themselves. Once all those were white again, I painted over top one more time with yellow to wrap up my attempted look at glowing cut metal. I was going to let the paint job be the end of the glowing effect, but I decided I might as well try and up it a little bit more by using a long LED filament. I think it adds to the overall appearance of the finished product. To hold the filaments in place, I sliced up some clear heat shrink into little rings which I glued around the outline of the ship. I then threaded the noodle through the rings, and once it was in place, I shrunk the rings to grab the filament and hold it in place. I did the same thing for both sides of the ship. And while the effect could be improved upon with more lights in the middle, I thought this looked pretty good. The two sides then needed to be joined back together at the bottom, so I drilled some holes and I put in some brass rods. And after they had been joined together, I bent the tops away from each other to give the ship more of an appearance that it was splitting apart midair. Then it was time to move back to the base and figure out the ship and the red frame's placement. I drilled a hole in the base as well as in a wooden block, which I will be putting behind the base to give a little bit more sturdiness to the standoff. After pressing the standoff into the block, I glued the block and the base together using some wood glue. Once that had cured, it was time to prep the base, and while I do that, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. I grabbed a sheet of paperless foam board and unnecessarily punched a hole through it after I decided to go a different route with the base. I cut some wedges out of the foam and placed them on opposite corners of the base to create a street, which I detailed with some scored expansion lines and some styrene sidewalks. I then textured the foam with a foil ball and gave the whole base a layer of texture using Tamiya putty diluted with isopropyl alcohol. I've watched Night Shift use this process to make micro textures of many different kinds. I thought it would be perfect for the concrete on this base. I sanded the surface to remove any large texture, and then I primed the base black. And then I switched to gray and applied it splotchily to give the base a little bit more of a concrete look. And then I masked off a center line using some tape. I used the nice stuff for the middle, and then scotch to make my masked area wider. I broke out the airbrush again, and after the lines had been painted, I peeled away the tape, which did not peel away as nicely as I had hoped. I wasn't too worried about the small imperfections in the paint job because the next step was an oil wash, which helps blend everything together and make the imperfections appear like extra texture. I dabbed off the oil washes, I used some panel liner on the cracks and gave some final washes and glazes to give the street some extra life. And now that I'm looking at it, I think I made the street a little big for 1 to 1/44 scale, but yeah, who's gonna notice? At last, it was time to start wiring things up and getting ready for the final assembly and the finishing details. I soldered wires to the filaments, I insulated the connections, I pressed the ship into place, and I ran the wires down through the tube into the base. I tested my circuit and connected everything to a potentiometer and to a battery pack. This allows me to adjust the brightness, which is pretty nice. I wanted this diorama to look like it was right in the middle of the ship being sliced in two, so I lined up a bundle of fiber optic wires and then I sliced them at an angle. I then flipped around the other side and I put them all in one long line together. And these are not side glowing fiber optics, which is unfortunate, so they don't carry light all the way to the end on the sides, but It's okay, I think I have a way to make them look a little better. And that was to paint them with a gradient of yellow and orange using the airbrush. After that, I threw the suits in place, and the last thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with black 4.0. And after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.